Originating in a glacier on the world's highest Tibetan plateau, the Brahmaputra River, as it is known in India, and Tsangpo, as in Tibet, is one of the world's longest and widest rivers, traveling through three countries and covering 2,900 kilometers. Along the way, it has spawned and sometimes destroyed great human societies in Tibet, India, and Bangladesh, where it merges into the Bay of Bengal. It's a river flowing with a million stories and more, populated by explorers, spymasters, and mapmakers over the centuries, charting those as well as the Brahmaputra's environmental, agrarian, and civilizational impact as journalist and writer Sanjoy Hazarika, who has spent over 20 years traveling along with it from Tibet to the Bay of Bengal via India's Arunachal Pradesh and Assam states. The result is his latest book, River Traveler Journeys on the Sangpo Brahmaputra from Tibet to the Bay of Bengal. Sanjoy spoke to MCR from Shillong, the capital of the northeastern Indian state of Meghalaya. Sanjoy Hazarika. Welcome to my Shire Report, Sanjoy. It's a great pleasure to have you, and many congratulations on your new book, River Traveler.
Thank you, Mike. Well, it's great to see you. As I was saying, you haven't changed much. The hair is still there, and you're looking a bit gray and wiser. I'm gray and balding. So
No, I must say for the benefit of the viewers that Sanjoy and I go back a long way, over 3 decades. We obviously both journalists. Sanjoy was at that point a very high-profile one, working for the Grand New York Times. So I've known him from that time, and Sanjoy has written so many books after that. And the reason why he's here is his latest one, which is River Traveler. It's basically a book made over the last 20 years of his journeys from Tibet via Arunachal Pradesh, all the way to the Bay of Bengal. So let me begin with this, Sanjoy. Your book tells the story of the Brahmaputra River, or the Sangpo, as it's known in Tibet, where it originates. The story straddles some 20 years of your journeys along the river. Tell me how it all started.
well, I've been entranced by the river since a child because one of the first images of the river as a child, which I still have in mind, is going down in a car by the river and seeing dolphins leaping and dancing on the river. You don't see them in Guwahati anymore. You have to go a bit of a distance because the river has become polluted because of the huge growth of the population of the city and uh, the stuff that is dumped into the river. But and that in a way tells you a little bit of what's changed. But this so that's always the beginning. There's always something that stirs your imagination. And many years ago, I had a chance to travel into along the river with a film crew to make this film called A River Story with this great director Jahanu Barua.
Oh, indeed, indeed.
Yeah, so in the process, and that film is available on YouTube or our YouTube, you can see it. It's called A River Story, The Quest for the Brahmaputra. And in the course of the filming, which was spread over a few years, I also went to Tibet with a team, small team, shot there, which seems almost it seems impossible nowadays.
It
But
is.
given conditions between India and China, but also how Tibet has grown or is secluded from the world. So yeah, so those are some of the initial stories, and the river was always not just a great attraction, but also a key challenge that I saw to both life's growth and trajectory, but also to the region's well-being and the way it was. It shaped everything: history, geography, countries, regions, people, lives, and communities.
Speaking of that, as one of the world's longest and widest rivers, traveling some 2,900 kilometers, the Brahmaputra has spawned civilizations
as well as a famously furious river, also destroyed human societies. What is your image of the river after having been along it for such a long time? How do you see the Brahmaputra? Do you see it as a sort of an extension of your life?
Well, it's a very turbulent river in times of flood. It's not the longest river, it's one of the longest
Yeah,
rivers,
yeah,
but it certainly carries more sediment than most other rivers. It's a river that is building, that is helping the continent to grow, as it were, as it brings silt and sediment down from Tibet through Assam and dumps it in the Bay of Bengal. So satellite imagery shows a growth, in a way, the creation of islands and the creation of larger stretches of land in the Bay of Bengal as a result of that. So I see it as a great traveler. You know,
hmm,
the river is the traveler. We are traveling on the river, but the river itself is a traveler through millennia and a builder. And it is like a grandparent in winter, relaxed, taking the sun. But in summer and the floods, it is a powerful entity that is capable of sweeping away villages and habitation and any man-made structure. So we need to be conscious of that power, respectful of it, and not try and intervene so much as to incur its wrath. I mean, because that will always end up badly for the guy at the other end.
at what point does it become a furious river? Because I'm sure when it starts from the Tibetan plateau, it's pretty gentle and then it rushes. Have you figured out when it becomes acquires that ferocious reputation that it has? I mean, I'll tell you. Sorry to digress a bit. Growing up in Ahmedabad, as far away as one can be from the Brahmaputra, I always remember the stories about the flooding caused by Brahmaputra. That's the only image I have of that river. So tell me about at what point it becomes rather angry.
Well, it depends on the weather and the what makes it angry. It can be a natural dam which has come, which is pausing its flow, or a tributary upstream, because it doesn't. You can't measure the river in terms of that perception uh, in one part, because it is like that in even in Tibet. In Tibet also it floods. At 13,000 feet, you'll have a flood because it's rained, and the snow melt has been. There's been a surge, and I've driven through a flood in Tibet. I describe it. It's quite nerve wracking.
Right.
You think you're going to be swept away in this flood, and you think, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I've been on boats, in smaller boats and larger boats on the Brahmaputra in Assam, where you're hit by a storm and you have to pull to the side and wait for the storm, the cyclone almost to subside
I
before you
see.
can venture out. So it's been, those are the times when you have to be very conscious. You depend a lot on the pilot, the driver of the vessel, and his sense of danger, but also his sense of safety. So you have to depend on people who
Right.
know the.
Right.
And similarly, in Bangladesh, I've been swept out to sea.
I see.
So that's not uh, because of the a sudden storm or something, but because uh, we cut the engine so that it wouldn't disturb the filming. And
Hmm.
then the river is so strong, the current is so strong. After some time, I looked around, you couldn't see any land.
I see.
And we are somewhere in the Bay of Bengal.
Really?
Then we had to struggle to go back. That's quite a story, actually, because we were chased by pirates and all that.
Oh, I
So
see.
it's all in the book. So it's been a pretty rollicking at time, and very challenging and very exhausting, but life changing experience on the river.
I'm very interested in your Tibetan connection while filming. Since I'm not able to travel, I would be extremely pleased to do that, but I'm not able to. Tell me about what you remember of the Tibetan plateau. This is which year are we talking about? When were you there?
Oh, this is quite some time ago. This is in 98,
Okay.
so 27 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, what are your memories of Tibet and very, very far from the origin of the Brahmaputra, or you were somewhere?
Well, we are not permitted to film near there because that was going towards Mansarovar and that side.
Okay,
But we traveled. We traveled for 2 weeks in Tibet, and with no security,
I see.
and we traveled throughout. Not just it was. We arrived at a place called Gongar, which is the airport about 90 kilometers from Lhasa,
Hmm.
and we traveled to Gyanse, Shigatse. And then we went on to places like towards Bai, which is at the lip of the Great Gorge,
Right.
entering the Sangpo Gorge. So we stopped before that, and we were stopped not because we had to go back. We were forced to return back, retreat by a flood, which washed away the road.
I see.
So the road we could not access the road because the road just was disappeared under a sheet of water or was broken in different parts. So the driver was not keen to at all to take us there because of the danger that we may not be able to come back because if the road is broken, then we could be stuck there. And then, of course, the choice then was to float down the Sangpo gorge, which is
Right.
not which very few people in history have ever done.
Right.
It's a precipitous fall down the river.
Yeah,
But
it is a
but
bit. Yeah, I was checking that it's really a steep fall.
yeah, and many of the great waterfalls which were were thought to exist were discovered, some of them only recently, by Western people. The
Right.
Tibetans knew they were there. They're discovered in quotes, no,
Right.
because the Tibetans know these places as places of seclusion, of spiritual solace, of pemako, of the hidden space
Right.
which is there in their texts and so on. So they've always known about these places and have been there. But
Right.
the outside world, it was a revelation.
I was fascinated by the sheer geological
But
terrain.
you are asking me about what I remember most about Tibet, and
Huh.
I will tell you these two images. One is of a view that stretches to infinity.
Hmm.
Like I have this image of I have this photograph of a road which is going straight. There's no deviation, going
I see.
straight as far as you can see to the horizon. On one side, fields of buckwheat and mustard, golden yellow, and the river. On the other side are croplands which sort of merge into hills, which become mountains, sand and snow. It's like something out of an incredible book, and it's there in front of you, and you can't even absorb it all.
Yeah,
It is
absolutely.
so spectacular. Some of this is changing because of thanks to what the Chinese are doing with infrastructure. They're building in fast trains and better highways and building dams and all this sort of thing.
Right.
But these are some of the primary impressions of a very primary power, energy, physical energy, as well as spiritual energy, which exists in many of its spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. In my book about the Dalai Lama, I don't know if you're aware or not. Uh,
Mm.
uh, it's
I've seen it.
Yeah. In fact, my argument is that a lot of the appeal of not just Tibet, but even Tibetan Buddhism flows from the staggering nature of the way it's constructed geologically. I mean, if Tibet was just a normal plain, I seriously wonder whether it would have the same exotic appeal that it has even now on people. That's why my fascination with the land, and unfortunately, like I keep saying, I'm not able to travel. Anyway, to change a bit, you write about your book, in fact, speaks of interesting characters, explorers, as you call them, spy masters, map makers. Tell me a bit more about that. What kind of characters are we talking?
Well, there are explorers like the Swedish explorer Sven Hedin, who actually was the first Western person to get to the location of the source of the Tsangpo,
Right.
which is near the Chema-Yungdong Glacier. It's not the Mansarovar River or the lake, as people tend to think, which is
No, it's not. No.
where others emerge from, but it is near that. It's called the Chema-Yungdong River, near the glacier. In which it describes a forest. No, it's very graphic. It describes this forest of ice and great Eiffel pieces falling off and breaking off and making crackles like thunder.
Fascinating. Yeah.
So then there were people like Frank Bailey and John Morset. Uh, John Morset was a surveyor who was a well-known climber and had accompanied Mallory, I think, on that expedition to Everest many years before this. But then he and Bailey, who was actually a spy, he was to sum it up crudely, uh, in His Majesty's service, and they went to explore the whether the Brahmaputra and the Sangpo were the same river,
I
because
see.
after 1913 this had not been proved by anybody, and so they were the first people going by the banks of the river who actually finally physically said, yes, this is with the way it goes, this is the way it comes, this is the flow, and these are its names. uh, but there were these what are called these pandit,
Hmm.
who were excellent mountaineers, pandits from uh, up in the Uttarakhand, Himachal area, whose families used to be on trading missions in Tibet and so on. So many of them spoke Tibetan, and they would wear the poshak, the dress of local travelers, and they were trained by the Survey of India to take measurements. So in the rosaries would be there would be more extra beads, which will help them count the number of paces. In the spinning wheel, they would keep the surveyor's equipment, tiny, just like something out of a James Bond movie, with without the glamour.
Right.
And
Right.
they would take measurements and look at uh, the position of the sun and the stars, and put all these down on pieces of paper, which they would do in code and put in their prayer wheel, and they would walk hundreds of kilometers
Right.
to explore not just the river, make notes of what they saw, and then come back, sometimes by a different route. At times they were robbed and of all their things, but their basic tools remain the same.
Right.
So there are amazing stories like that, and that continued until well into the first 20 years of the 20th century.
Right. Right.
These are some of the stories.
The river, in some ways, is at the heart of Tibet and its struggles, cultural, environmental, political, even human. What is the difference between the way Tibetans see the Brahmaputra Sangpo and the way Indians see it?
Well, that's a very good question because I think the Tibetans regard water bodies as sacred. And they do not like the idea of damming them, fishing in them, using them for commerce. They're seen as sacred spaces where many, because Tibet, you must remember, is not just a land of Buddhism, it is a land where there are many spirits, there are
Indeed.
many gods and goddesses, and which are supposed to live in certain parts of the hidden caves and cliffs and gorges of the country. That's how it's in their minds even now, and waterfalls behind waterfalls. uh, in India, it's certainly when it comes uh, into Arunachal and so on, there is not that much discourse with the river. But as it comes down into the plains, there is a greater connect.
Right.
There is a story of Parshuram who is supposed to have cleaved a way for the river to flow down to the plains, the Lohit, as
Right.
it were. Yeah. Then in the Brahmaputra, the son of Brahma, etc. All these legends are there. So there are different stories that connect people to it. But also, I think in in the public imagination, while that is still there in places like Assam, uh, there is a greater political and economic perception that has set in, which is that China's over there, they're using the river, weaponizing the waters. We have to sort of defend our rights, etc., etc. So that is also taking over, I think, people's perceptions. But many of the traditions still remain. People still pray to the river. People, they do believe that the river is an entity
Hmm.
which they need to respect. And many of the musical compositions, the great ballads, the great songs, which were composed not just by Bhupen Hazarika but by many beforehand, have a connection to the Lohit, or as the Brahmaputra is also known, although it's a different river, and to the Brahmaputra itself. And Bhupen Hazarika, of course, made it to not just regionally but nationally and international famous with his composition Burha Lohit, which is
Right.
about the old man river.
Hmm.
Why do you flow so fiercely? Responding to what you said, are you ignoring the cries of suffering humanity and so on? That's one of his great compositions.
Right. Right. You mentioned you referred to weaponization of river waters. How serious is that threat? Perhaps not related to your book directly, but I want to understand your perspective. Do you think China could create trouble for India by harnessing the Brahmaputra or even blocking it in some ways?
See, Brahmaputra is a very difficult entity to block. I mean, you cannot. It is like many tsunamis which go through that great gorge. So
Right.
you need an enormously safe dam in order to hold back water. But I think the Chinese are intent on using the water as it flows and not creating too much of a great
I see.
lake, continuously releasing the water so there's no pressure, because water is very heavy, as you
Right.
know,
Right.
and the weight of water can cause immense damage to any obstacle that is in its way, whether it's a rock, a cliff, or a house, or whatever, a dam. So that's why they've been saying that there won't be any reduction of the flow and all that.
I see.
I'm not a hydrologist and I'm not a dam specialist. So, and the Chinese have been very cautious and about their revelations of on this particular dam. It is going to be the world's biggest dam, etc., etc. But the details are not really known.
Right.
So it's still some 10 to 15 years in the making. So you just have to wait and see. I mean, downstairs, that's right, downstream, I'm sorry, the lower riparians are raising great concerns. But I think India needs to negotiate harder. I mean, it's been diverted by other issues on its borders and on other issues with China. But I really think that it needs to be a bit more hard nosed and practical about water issues, because it will affect the northeast, it will affect Assam, and
Right.
certainly it affects Bangladesh downstairs, downstream. And
Right.
that's the other thing about international rivers, is that there are very few rivers in the world where the agreement between riparian countries, because there is no law, international law that's binding. There are only conventions.
True. True.
There's a
True.
law of the sea, but and there's an international convention on rivers, but no binding treaties.
Right. Just last couple of things, Sanjoy. One is, why do you think the Brahmaputra has not been accorded the exalted status that the Ganga has been?
But the Brahmaputra flows in a very distant part of India, technically speaking. I mean, the Ganga is much more next to Delhi. It's very much part of
The political landscape,
the
as it were.
the history, mythology, and myth making and religious heart, the much larger populations which are affected by it.
Right.
The greatest population that's affected by the Brahmaputra is not in Assam, not in India, it's in Bangladesh.
Bangladesh, yes.
So, I think all these factors do play in. It's
Hmm.
both politics as much as anything else.
Right.
But now they're paying attention to it. But now, because of the fact that we do not have good relations with Bangladesh as of now, you're building navigation channels. But where will you navigate to? I
True.
mean, the train stops at the border of Bangladesh, which means you can travel for 700 kilometers, and that's it. You can't keep going up and down the river,
Yeah.
doing, carrying goods from one town to the other, because that's better carried by road and railway.
Right.
So we need to have better relations with Bangladesh so that it can open up the route to international trade, which is how it always was. I mean, I remember a great Bangladeshi scholar, one of the founders of Bangladesh, saying that, well, when I was a young man, I used to study in Lahore, we'd come to Calcutta, we'll take a ferry and cross over to, he described a route to Dhaka.
Think about
And
that.
it was, he says, we need to get back to a much civilized, better civilized way of communicating and reaching out to each other. And rivers can teach us that.
Yeah.
Rivers
Absolutely.
can really teach us that, because they don't recognize borders, hard borders.
Right.
The stories and music and cultures flow along rivers.
Right.
And
In terms of to conclude, Sanjoy, in terms of environmental degradation over the last 20 years or so, what's been your perspective? Because you've seen it from close quarters across different regions, like we said, from the Tibetan plateau all the way to the Bay of Bengal, the Delta, etc.
well, each nation, as it were, each part of the Great Basin, because the Brahmaputra is an entity not just by itself, but because of all the other rivers and the elements of the river basin, which is the Meghna Brahmaputra Ganga basin. It's one of the greatest river basins of the world, where a large part of the world's population lives. So if you take just the countries, it doesn't do justice to the system. But anyway, we'll do it that way. Uh, Tibet has its own challenges because of the infrastructure which is being put on by the Chinese, because of global warming, climate change, the railways and infrastructure building, including tunneling and so on, which is being done ad infinitum, is damaging the permafrost. How much it's damaging, we don't know, because that's again the ice that's locked into the soil of the land. That's being released at a much faster pace. We don't know at what pace. When you come down the river, there are more dams which are being built in Arunachal
Right.
along the different major streams. That has an impact. And if you come down into Assam, because of the the naturally the government and the people demand development, so you will have to build bridges, you have to build roads, infrastructure, but all these, especially the roads, get damaged by the railways. Then they have to build more embankments and block the flooding. All these play with each other. The river plays and battles and fights its
Right.
way against all these restrictions. And there is, as you go increasingly down the river, down the route, there are three or four things as you go up to Bangladesh. There are three or four things that strike you. Is that because of growing populations and the lack of sewage along those that route along the cities, there's a lot of pollution that leaches into the river
Right.
uh, from the farms, but especially tea plantation. A lot of pesticides flow into the river. There's a lot of use of very gill nets, which are actually
Mm.
banned for fish catching, even during the season when you're not supposed to catch fish because they breed and so on. And this is a challenge as it goes along the river. I mean, there are the demands of development and ecological pressure on the environment on the river grows as a result. And it's a bit unfair on the river because it's been carrying this burden without complaining for centuries and millennia. And now
Right.
you're putting much more pressure on it without caring for its needs. In Bangladesh, there is also acute pressure in terms of uh, farming and fishing and uh, the evacuation of waste products into the river. So it becomes highly polluted as you go along. So these are some of the basic fundamental questions. But a flood comes, a lot of this gets washed away, a lot of it gets cleared, and then the river moves on. You see it in its great power and its indomitable spirit. But there are these acute pressures, and we can't deny that, as well as the challenges of climate change and displacement, which are caused by it, because the river can be shallow at times of the summer if the rains do not come in time. And when that happens, crops are devastated, farmers lose their earnings, livelihoods are lost, and people migrate. So, migration is one of the things that is happening increasingly as a result of not the river running dry, but longer stretches of dry period. The dry season stretches now over several months. When I say dry, it's not bone dry, it's just the river is shrunk,
Right.
to a couple of channels.
Yeah.
But uh, so these are the challenges that face the river, and all of us who live by it and are respectful to it and dependent on it. Because those who are dependent on it include those who don't know they're dependent on it.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah. To conclude, where do you think it is at its prettiest in your journey? Where did you find it at its prettiest?
Well, it's always pretty wherever you go. It's a handsome river, it's a male river. I
Right.
don't see you brought it pretty, but it's a handsome river. It's beautiful in the Bay of Bengal as you go out. It's beautiful inland, but I think it's most rugged, and most challenging, and most handsome in Tibet.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
truly. To satisfy your curiosity, to the man who wrote about Tibet without going there, but
Yeah.
I hope
You
you
know,
will get there.
I find it's interesting that a lot of the times people describe rivers as pretty beautiful, but Brahmaputra has it is very fiercely rugged, as you said. And I think the fact that it comes from Tibet has a great deal to do with it.
I think that's so. And I'm always conscious. I mean, I remember standing at the base of a gorge and looking up. I'm seeing, standing by the river. It's barely 20 feet wide at that point, but going like fury. So I'm standing on a few rocks just near the river, and you're looking up and you're saying, my God, this river tunneled through all this, carved its way. And I'm standing here after perhaps millions of years, and
Yeah.
you realize your own smallness
Right.
in the face of the larger scheme of things. And the other thing that I always am grateful for, and it's a very simple thing, I don't swim.
I see.
When I've traveled from the river to from the upper reaches in Tibet to where it ends at the Bay of Bengal, and the river gods have been the river, and the river gods have been very kind to me and kept me safe.
No, that's wonderful. Once again, congratulations on the book. I hope it does very well. At some point, I'll get to it and read it. But these questions were mainly derived from what you sent me and a video of yours that I saw in the morning. There was an event in Bangalore, right?
Yes,
That's the
that
one I
was
saw partly. Yeah, yeah.